It's not uncommon for me to hear people ask this question. How could a good God allow a world with this much suffering? And even the glimpses of things we see on the news is a horribly selective medium by which to judge things. Because one of the things, and I know therapists have the same deal, as a pastor so often, people tell you their stories, and people tell you the most significant stories of their lives, and almost always those stories involve pain. Often they involve secret pain. Things that happen behind closed doors. Betrayals. And people get to the point where they say, it would be better if God hadn't made the world. And I don't think people mean that, but that cry expresses what they're feeling. And then often people will say things like, well, we could do a better job running the world than God. Or I could do a better job running the world than God. But every time I hear that, I think, but we are running the world. This young man who shot up that school is one of us. It's not them, it's us. This is what we do. And you might say, yeah, but I never took an assault rifle and shot a bunch of kids. But if we think about what we actually do to each other, and one of the things you realize as a pastor, that the greatest cruelties often happen within families. People will say and do things to their own family members that they would never dare say or do to a stranger. And then we say, well, how could God allow any of this? This week in The Spectator, there was a very interesting article. Does aid do more harm than good? It goes into Oxfam, which is a British charity that tries to do development in Africa. And there was a scandal basically that during the Haitian earthquake, that men were exchanging aid paid for by British taxpayers and donations for sex. In other words, well, that's just it. And then more stories were coming up that, in fact, this practice had been happening all over Africa. That people would go into villages with food aid, and the families very quickly realized they could give their girls to the food workers as prostitutes. And word got around, and villages that never saw any prostitution had prostitution because of the food aid. And then, we all know that individual human hearts can be corrupted. And then we think, well, then we can have institutions. And institutions will keep us safe from individuals. And so I think in some ways, when these school shootings happen, part of what's so dramatic for us is we think, an institution will keep us safe. But then, when the Roman Catholic priest scandal hit, that just the bottom fell out of many Roman Catholics and their trust in the church. So then we think, well, it's because of the Bible and all this old stuff. That's all contaminated. So if we build an organization and we staff it with good people, then bad things won't happen. And they found out that Oxfam knew about all of this stuff and had been covering it up and denying it. And now all the people who wouldn't want to have anything to do with the church because we can't trust them, we're giving to Oxfam because all of these celebrities were backing them, Bono, and they would all stand up and everybody say, yeah, I like Bono, so I'll give money to them. And now everybody is looking at this and saying it's a sham. And then they look even deeper. And so then this one African woman she's an economist from Zambia, and she does a study, and she said at the second half of the 20th century, over $1 trillion was given to African aid. And in that time, poverty rose from 11% to 66%. And she compares it, she said, in 1957, Ghana boasted a higher per capita GDP than South Korea. You don't see Ghana hosting the Olympics, do you? And that lends to the question. 30 years later, it was lower by a factor of 10. The toxic effect of official development aid became one factor. On the other hand, South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia were the recipients of very little aid. They started out poorer and they flourished. And they're now wealthy and powerful. And so you begin to say, we thought we could fix this world. But now we wonder if our efforts actually hurt. Well, the story of the Bible begins where God speaking a good world into the disorder of chaos. And a good world and a good story begins. And the man and the woman are made in his image. And they're given authority. And, you know, in my Sunday school class, I always draw this. This is a representation of Genesis 1. You have heaven above and earth below. And this is implicitly the world that we live in. You ask any child, where is God? Where is heaven? They'll point up. Well, heaven and earth. And it was good. And God brought order to this world. But then the man and the woman ate at the suggestion of the serpent, and they begin to distrust God. And you would think that initially they thought, well, we can't trust God, so just you and me, Eve, we'll be in this together. But you know the story. God comes in the garden, and they're hiding. And God says, who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree? And what's the first word out of Adam's mouth? It was that woman that you gave me. In one phrase, he throws God and this woman that he had just finished singing, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, throws them both under the bus. And distrust spreads between the man and the woman and the serpent, and nobody trusts God. And it grows. The man and the woman are exiled from the royal garden. And the man would fight the earth to wrest food from it to survive. And the woman would fight her body to wrest a future from it through childbirth. The man and the woman could no longer see their Creator's face because it would crush them. That God was not safe to be around anymore. And so they were exiled. And heaven and earth are cut off. And the story continues. Now, one of the things I often mention in the Sunday school class is there's no altar in the Garden of Eden. And we, in a secular society, don't notice this. But any ancient would have noticed it. The reason there's no altar is because God and people live face to face. An altar is a way to make a connection from a divided world. The man and the woman could no longer access the heavens, which controlled the earth. And the sons of the parents tried to reconnect with God through sacrifices. And the irony is that the first murder in the Bible happens as a result of sacrifice. And so sacrifices go up, and we try to represent in the animal our sin. And just as in the garden, the animal takes the hit for us. So then the story continues and there's development. Parents, the first two children, one murders the other. But humanity begins to develop, and humanity to develop cities and technology and all these kinds of things. And so the image of God in us is at work. We are dominating the world and we are using it. And sometimes we use it for glory, but often we use it for violence. The gift of image bearing endures, but in an uneven and twisted way. And then when chapter 6 comes along, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. And every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. And the Lord regretted he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. And I think when we ask ourselves, well, what does God think of what happened in Florida? Well, I think this verse answers it. But here's the problem. We just see what happened in Florida and say, oh, that's an aberration. But God sees what happens behind all closed doors. God looks at the crushing poverty in Africa and how so often our efforts to help hurt. And he sees this happen again and again and again, and not just in little spots here and there that the news picks up, but he sees it in every household, in every heart, and he sees it all the time. And when we ask, how can God stand it? That's a good question. But we don't think through, how could he stop it? Yeah, by getting rid of us. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created. And with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that moved along the ground. But they didn't do anything. But when we rebelled, they rebelled against us. And the violence just multiplies. And God says, I regret I made them. Sometimes I see parents get frustrated. And they say horrible things, like to a child, saying, I wish I never had you. Some of you might have heard that from your parents. You know what that feels like. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Someone out there isn't as bad as the rest. And then you have this little piece of the structure of the book of Genesis. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy them, both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. And then he gives them the dimensions. But what's interesting here is that when we say, well, God should do something about it, we never really think through and ask, well, what should be done with us? And what's really interesting here is God didn't say, Noah, go up on top of this top mountain, because then you'll avoid the flood. He doesn't do that. He says, Noah, build an ark. Now, right there is a challenge to Noah, because if Noah says, I don't feel like it today, well, that's going to have consequences. And building an ark this size is no small task. And so God gives him the dimensions, and he tells him the plan. I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth and destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has breath in it, everything on the earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you. This is the first use of that word in the Bible. Covenant. Covenant. Well, what does that mean? I'm going to establish it with you, and you will enter the ark, and you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. God is saying, I'm going to collaborate with you. I am going to work with you. I am going to start something with you. I'm going to drown the world, but I'm going to start something with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to be kept alive. And you are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and stored away for food for them. And now what's clear here is that if you remember the story, God makes the man and the woman to be his stewards, to be his managers, to be his representatives here on the earth. And Noah is fulfilling that here. You're to care for the animals. You're to bring them in. This is my plan that you are going to fulfill what I made you for. And Noah obeyed. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Now what you see here is that, and this the Bible does all the time, there's a lot of repetition. And the reason for the repetition is that there are a lot of literary structures that are working in the text in order to bring emphasis. And so often the Bible will say something, and it'll say it again, but it'll say it in a little different way to highlight the difference. So take with you 7 pair of every kind of clean animal. Well, this is new. A male and its mate. And 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal. A male and its mate. Now, those of you who've been going to church for a long time and know a little something of the Old Testament, this whole clean and unclean thing that's always kind of mysterious. What's really mysterious about it here is that whole thing gets laid out in the book of Exodus with Moses, which in the story of the Bible is way later. You don't find this talk in the book of Genesis. Why are we talking about clean and unclean here? So unclean get 1 pair to reproduce, to repopulate the earth. The clean get 7 pair. Now again, if you read the Bible, you'll know not 4 pair, not 6 pair, not 8 pair, 7 pair. Well, what's with 7? Well, read the Bible. 7s are all over the place. 7 days of the week. 7 angels, 7 stars. The Hebrews love the symbology of numbers. And also 7 pair of every kind of bird, male and female, and keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now I will send rain on the earth. For 40 days and 40 nights. And you hear that, 40 days and 40 nights. Israel in the desert, 40 years. Jesus tempted, 40 days and 40 nights. All the 40s. I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature that I have made. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded. Repetition again. What's with the clean? So then the flood happens, and in Genesis, the waters above and the waters below crash in, and in a sense, just like at the beginning of Genesis 1, the world becomes tohu wabohu, and everything is wiped out until chapter 8. But God remembered Noah. And now we read that and we think, God is like this absent-minded, doddering old man that's rummaging around heaven and, Noah! And, no, that's not what it is. We started using the language of covenant. And when the Bible uses the word remember, well, you might notice what's written on this table right here. Do this in remembrance of me. This is covenant language. And the language is God acted on Noah's behalf. If you pray, and 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 God never seems to answer your prayer, and then suddenly the heavens part, and your answer comes down, you would rightly say in Old Testament language, God remembered me. And you'll find that language all over the Bible. Hannah, when she has a baby at the beginning of the book of Samuel, God remembered me. Mary, when she gets the annunciation from the angel, God remembered his servant. God remembered Noah. And all the wild animals and livestock. He made a covenant with them too. Noah at the head, but they're all part of the package that were with him in the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Then God said to Noah, come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every living thing that has been with you, the birds and the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number. This is an echo of Genesis 1. We're restarting creation. God came in, looked at the violence of the world, and said, I'm going to act. I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of all the violent people, but I'm just going to save Noah, the best man in the world. And so God does it. He says, okay, we're starting the story over again. So Noah came out together with his sons and his wife's sons, all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, and all the birds and everything that moves on the land came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, and he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. And now if you're like me, you'll say, now wait a minute. You went through all the work of saving these critters, and the first thing you do when you get off the boat is you kill them? Well, it tells us how foundational this was for Noah. This for him was just as instrumental as building the boat. But notice he only sacrifices the clean animals. And now we're back thinking about Moses. Because if you would sacrifice an unclean animal, that would be a sacrilege. That would be an intentional insult to God. You only sacrifice the clean animals. And so then you say, well, Pastor, what are the clean animals? And there's a whole lot of discussion about what's really behind that whole symbolic area. We don't understand it that well. But it seems to be about ideas that the Hebrews had about confusion. One of the things that always bothered me was lobsters were unclean animals. And growing up on the East Coast and being in New England a lot, one of the favorite things we would do would eat lobsters. And lobsters are delicious, and that's why they cost so much here. Why would the Lord make lobsters unclean? And bacon? Well, lobsters are unclean, we think, because in the Hebrew symbolic imagination, an ordered animal of the sea should swim, not walk. And so lobsters were unclean, and fish with scales were clean and could be eaten, but not lobsters. I think, oh, well, that's interesting. Well, what was God trying to teach them about order? Because you remember, order starts the story in Genesis 1. Well, God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." That's what he said in Genesis 1. "And the fear and the dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth." Is this new? "And on all the birds of the sky and on every creature that moves along the ground, and all the fish in the sea, they are given into your hands." You're responsible for them. You're in charge of them. They're afraid of you because you've rebelled, and so they rebel against you, but you're responsible for them. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. This is new. At the beginning of Genesis, they were only given the plants to eat. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. Woo! Noah can eat lobsters. That's a good thing. But then he continues. "You must not eat meat that has lifeblood in it." And actually, if you want more on this, I did a lot of talking about this at the 9:30 Sunday school lesson, which will be on YouTube. It's already on the Facebook channel. And so God says, well, lifeblood belongs to me. So you can eat the animals, but understand that they really do belong to me, so you return the life to the ground. Okay. "I will demand an accounting for every animal." Huh? "Don't eat them ungratefully, because that animal gave its life for your life." What are you trying to teach us? That animal gave its life for your life. What are you trying to teach us? "From each human being, too, I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being." Why did God bring the flood? Violence. They were killing each other. And God says, no more of that. Oh yeah, we're going to keep that one. "Whoever sheds human blood, by humans their blood will be shed. For in the image of God, God has made mankind. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply in the earth and increase there." And then he goes back to the covenant. "I will establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will the flood destroy the earth." And this is a sign of the covenant. And he puts a rainbow. And you might think, well, what is a rainbow? And it's a sign not just to you, but to the animals as well. Well, actually, a rainbow makes perfect sense. Because if you're a Hebrew and you see waters falling, you might say, is it going to happen again? The rainbow shows the firmament. It shows God's protection that when it rains, it's not going to take everything. It's a sign of God's covenant. But then again, why does God make this a covenant? Why does he make this an agreement? Well, it makes perfect sense because the world was destroyed with our violence, so he says, I'll make you a deal. I won't flood the earth again if you stop killing each other. Does that sound like a good deal? Sounds like a good deal. How have we done with that? Not so good. So he collaborates with us. And he didn't have to. He could have done all of this by himself. But he says, Noah, build an ark. And he says, Noah, get the animals. And Noah says, I will do sacrifices to you. And the covenant language starts coming in. And then the meat eating starts. But what's really interesting is he could have said, just like was said to Moses, only eat the clean animals. No. You can eat any animal. You can eat lobsters. Well, that's interesting. What's going on with this? Well, when Israel comes along, Israel is to be a nation of priests. And they're told you may only eat clean animals. No lobsters for you, Israel. You say, well, why not? Nope, no lobsters for you. You're special. And you say, well, that kind of special I'm not sure I want. And if you look at the story of Israel, you'd be right to say that, because Israel is given tremendous promise and tremendous responsibility, and they fail at both. And so here's the thing. We blame God for not unilaterally acting. But when he comes to us and he says, I'll tell you what, I won't drown the earth again if you stop all the killing, we say, yes! But then what do? We kill. Now, what's God supposed to do? Well, if it's a contract, well, you pretty much messed up the killing thing. I'm going to flush you once more. But he doesn't. Instead, eventually now he sends Israel, and then he says to Israel, I'll make you a priest. Only eat clean food. And if you obey my covenant, then I'll bless you, and I'll make everything great. And Israel doesn't. And then, as we're talking about in the book of Ezekiel in Sunday school, he destroys Israel. And it's like, wait a minute, all of these pieces are coming together. And here's the crazy thing. The problem with God's plan with Noah was Noah. Because if you keep reading the story, it all goes bad again. And if God really wanted to clean the earth, he should have got rid of us completely. So then he says, I'll make deals with you. And if you keep your part of the deal, I'll keep mine. And then we don't keep ours. And so what is God supposed to do? Flood us again? Instead, what he does, Israel is elected to be a sacrifice. And she can't fulfill it. So Jesus comes in place of Israel, and he is a sacrifice. Because God looks down at us and says, even a simple arrangement. No more flooding, no more killing. Got it? Yeah, I understand. Sounds good. And we fail. And God says, you can't even hold that end of the bargain up. I will make myself a human being, and I will hold your end up for you. That is the gospel. Where God makes a deal, and we can't hold up our end, and God says, I'm going to come around the table and do your part for you too, because otherwise you're as good as dead. So then the question is, you're the beneficiary of this covenant. He paid for your sins with his own blood. Someone has to pay. And usually, if you're in a contract with someone, hey, you stop paying your rent, out you go. You stop paying your mortgage, out you go. You stop paying your car note comes back. Jesus comes and says, I'm going to pay for you. Now, if you see this, if you believe this, how does that change your heart? There's this story that pastors tell. Neighbor goes on vacation, tells his neighbor, take in my mail. Neighbor comes back from vacation, says, you got my mail? Yeah. gets the mail, quickly thumbs through looking for his mortgage statement. Where's my mortgage statement? I got to pay my mortgage. Oh, I took care of that. Well, what do you mean you took care of that? I just asked you to bring in the mail. Oh, I took care of that. Next month, no mortgage statement. Calls the bank. Well, your mortgage is paid. What do you mean my mortgage is paid? I thought he only paid 1 month. No, he paid the whole thing. How do you feel about your neighbor? You're probably going to go to everyone around you and talk about your neighbor. I asked him to take in the mail and he paid my mortgage. You mean he made a payment? No, he paid the whole thing. That's just your mortgage. This is the story of God making a deal with us that we failed at. And he paid it not with money, but with the life of his son. Now, if that doesn't move us, if we believe it, we really have to ask ourselves who we are. Let's pray. Lord, we want you to fix the world. And we want to cut deals with you. And even the simplest, most basic deal we try to cut with you, we fail at. And so you send your Son to hold up our end. Help us, Lord, to see the story. Help us, Lord, to understand the context. Help us, Lord, to in fact not only be the neighbor whose mortgage was paid, but be the kind of neighbor who can, in our own small ways, pay the mortgages of our neighbors. Give us your peace. Amen. Would you stand?